Okay, just a few other things that you've studied in your stats courses. Chapter 15 in Siegel talks about Anova models. You estimate Anova models with proc GLM. We've already talked about this. So you put the independent variable as a class statement, and you put that also in the model statement. The dependent variable is on the left-hand side of the equals. How do we run regression? Well, regression is with proc reg. You use a model statement with all of these, including GLM, and you specify the dependent variable as a function of all the independent variables that you want. Here are some commonly used options with this. Often you want to restrict your attention to certain cases. So for example, we may only want men if we use the CPK data set, we could regress. We could look at the means of various questions from men only. You can stick a where statement on just about any proc and SAS. So it's very useful to know about that. I can do the same thing with reg if I want to run the regression for men only. Sometimes you want to create output data sets after a model. So in SPSS, we do things like save the residuals or save the predicted values. The way you do this in SAS is with an output statement. Then you must specify an out option. So this specifies a new data set name, and then you list the variables that you want to save. We've seen things similar to this when we looked at proc summary and proc means. So predicted is the keyword for the predicted value from a regression. Residual is for the residual from a regression. And so you can see we now have the predicted values and the residuals. Here are more advanced modeling commands that you probably have not covered. They're mentioned briefly in Siegel chapter 15. These are interactions, and I guess the only thing I'll say at this point is if you need to fit multi-way Anova models with interactions, you use proc GLM. How do we fit logistic regressions? Well, we're going to use proc logistic, and the syntax is almost identical to proc reg. You have a model statement with the dependent variable as a function of the independent variables. The only thing that you need to know about is an additional option, descending. So what descending does is it says assume that the value, you're going to model the value of the larger value instead of the smaller value. So if 1 is yes and 0 is no, you need the descending option. So this is just going to say model the value of the larger thing, which would then be 1, yes. Sometimes data sets will use the convention 1 equals yes, 2 equals no. In that case, you'd want to model the value of the smaller thing. So yes is smaller than no if 2 is no. And that's the default in SAS. So you wouldn't need descending in that case. It's only when you have yes greater than no that you need descending. How do you run a factor analysis? Well, proc factor. You don't need a model statement with factor. Instead, you use a var statement, just as you do with proc means. 3 options that I use all the time. So one is reorder. This will sort your loadings, sort the variables in descending order of the loadings. This will make the output much more readable. You often want to use a rotation, such as a Varimax rotation. So you specify that with the rotate option. The third option is fuzz. So fuzz equals 0.3 doesn't print values less than your fuzz value. So values less than 0.3 have been printed as a dot. This cleans up your output. In SPSS, there's an option, what is it, suppress loadings less than something or other, and then the sort is the equivalent of reorder. You often want to save your factor scores from proc factor. How do you do this? Well, you need 2 different options. First off, you have to be very clear about how many factors you want to retain. You do that with the n factor option, and then the output data set is going to be specified with the out equals statement. So here are the factor scores if we factor analyze just those 5 variables. How do you run k-means clustering? You're going to use fastclus. Fastclus, as with factor and means, this doesn't take a model statement. It just uses a var statement. The maxc option specifies the number of clusters that you want to retain. So in this case, I'm retaining 3 clusters. And that's it for this overview. I've given you some additional problems that you might want to try to practice your use of these statistical procedures in SAS.